my name is Catherine and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about a book that I recently read and, spoiler alert, really enjoyed, and that is The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. I did a mini science breakdown for this book on my blog because I think it had some really interesting historical scientific perspectives within it. So we're going to talk about that today. First of all, Emma Donoghue is absolutely an auto-buy author for me. I don't know if I've read all of her books. Let me look. Okay, looking at the inside of this book and all the books she's written, I've read nowhere near all of her books. But I have read quite a few and enjoyed them. The first one I read was Room, which I highly recommend. I have not seen the movie. If you've seen it, is it good? But I've read Room, I've read The Wonder, and I read her most recent release before this one, Akin. I actually have a review for Akin on my blog, and I didn't really enjoy it. It was kind of a letdown. So when I saw that this book was coming out, I was very excited, but a little apprehensive. Everything else I've read by her, I've absolutely loved. Akin just didn't do it for me. I was nervous about this one, but this one redeemed her. So good. I think part of that is because she returned kind of to her roots. This was set in Ireland. She's Irish. It's historical fiction from the point of view of a woman, and it was just everything I love about her as an author in this book. But basically what it's about is a nurse by the name of Julia Powers, and you follow her really only across 2 days of her life, but in the midst of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And if you're really into plot-driven stories, this book probably isn't for you. It's mostly about the characters. I mean, there is some action in it, quite honestly. She's in a hospital. There are things happening all around. But it is more character driven. And one of the things that I absolutely loved about it was the characters. Of course, you get to know Julia really well. You're in her head. But you also meet other characters. You meet her brother. You meet other people who are working and volunteering at the hospital. And all of them have their own personalities, their own stories. And they're really interesting. And not to mention the patients. I thought the patients as characters were also really interesting. And even though you only know them for such a short period of time, what happens to them during that time, I think, is really emotional in some cases. And you really feel for them. So, actually, you know what? I'm gonna put this back here. As I said, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I loved the characters, and I absolutely loved the historical setting. So as I said, it takes place during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, and there are so many parallels to what we are currently living. First of all, everyone wearing masks. Also how overworked the hospital staff are and how full the hospital beds are. Also, sort of the sense of we don't really know what's going on. I mean, I think hopefully we're past that in our pandemic, but in this point in history, they really didn't know what was going on and what was causing these problems. And that was really interesting perspective. Also, there's so many things going on outside of the pandemic. There's World War I happening, so you have all the dynamics of war and supply shortages and lots of men in particular going off to war. So in some cases, shortages of doctors. Because it's in Ireland, you also have the ongoing conflict between Catholics and Protestants. And you also have the conflict between the people of Ireland that wish to be a part of the UK and those who do not and want to be an independent state governed by the Irish people. And all of this is happening with the pandemic, and all of this is happening in Julia's life, and it's so interesting, the interplay, how it affects the patients, how it affects Julia. It's so interesting, and I highly recommend. I should mention that the nurse that you follow, Julia Powers, works in maternity. So there's a lot of talk about childbirth. You experience some childbirth in the story. And just know that going in, if that's something you enjoy reading or something you like to stay away from, that is one of the focuses of the book as well. So that's my kind of stream of consciousness raving review of this book. I also wanted to take some time to talk about some of the science and the history in this book a little more in detail because I think it's so interesting. And again, if you want to read my blog post, I will link that below. So at the time that this story takes place, 1918, was when the Spanish flu, the H1N1 virus, had spread globally and was causing a global pandemic. And what is really interesting is at this time, scientists had discovered viruses, but there wasn't a clear definition of what a virus really was. And the public certainly was not familiar with viruses. And so even in this book, you hear one of the doctors, Dr. Lin, talk about the fact that they're trying to isolate the organism that is causing this disease, and they can't isolate the bacteria. And that's, of course, because it wasn't a bacteria, it was a virus. I thought that was a really interesting little piece in the book to take a look at. Also, keep in mind that at this time, we didn't have vaccines. Vaccines had not been invented yet, and there were no medicines to treat this disease. There weren't even antibiotics. So one of the things mentioned in the book is that a lot of time patients who had the flu would also contract pneumonia as a secondary infection, and that pneumonia would ultimately be what killed them. And part of the reason for that is because there weren't antibiotics. We had no way to treat pneumonia. So again, just interesting little details that I thought were really fun to pick up on. As I said, Nurse Julia Powers in the book works in a maternity ward, so we are focused very much in on pregnant women and mothers. And the pandemic of 1918 was really hard on young women and pregnant women. For some reason that we still don't totally understand, the virus was much more deadly for young adults in their, let's say, late teens to early 30s. And for women, this was the time period that they were having children for the most part. It was prime baby time. So that's part of the reason why pregnant women were so adversely affected, but also because pregnant women were predisposed. They had kind of a weakness for the virus. And again, that's something that we don't totally understand even today. We have some good ideas though, and part of that is because when a woman is pregnant, her immune system is weakened so that she doesn't reject the fetus. So that could very well have played a role in how susceptible these women were to the virus. Also, as I mentioned, pneumonia was actually a leading cause of death in flu patients. And when you're pregnant, your lungs change dramatically. There are all sorts of statistics out there about the lungs and breathing capacity of pregnant women that you can find. But one that I thought was really interesting was that the functional capacity of your lungs is decreased by 20% when you're pregnant. So you have basically 20% less useful space in your lungs. And for women who had the flu, that means that their lungs filled with fluid and they basically drowned to death sooner than women or other men who were not pregnant. And that again is reflected in the book. I don't want to give any spoilers, but you definitely see that at play. And I thought that was really interesting. Another complication from the flu specific to pregnant women of this time was that it caused a lot of stillbirths and premature labor. And again, that is something that we see in the book. I also just really enjoyed seeing how they were treating these women. For example, they gave them chloroform during birth to help ease their pain, which is something I had no idea about, and I can't even imagine. But that was really interesting. I wrote more about that on my blog as well. They would treat the women with whiskey, hot whiskey tea. Again, something we would never do today, but it was one of the resources that they had. Another interesting thing was they were very serious about hygiene and about disinfecting things. And that is something that I always kind of think about history and historical medicine and think of it as being dirty and them not understanding sterile technique. But they very much did at this point, and they were using it as best they could given the circumstances. And I thought that was really cool to see in the book as well. So let me bring it back out here. Overall, I would definitely recommend this book. It's not very long. It's character driven. It's set during a very interesting historical time period. There are lots of conflicts at play in the book, and it's very relatable given our current situation. So I would definitely encourage you to give this a read, and let me know what you think if you've read it, if you enjoyed it as much as I do. I don't think you'll be disappointed in it. There's a lot to unpack here, and I hope that I've inspired you to take a look and learn some more and enjoy a good book. So that's all from me today. I hope you enjoyed. Again, if you have read this book or you end up reading it, please let me know what you thought. And if you noticed anything interesting about the medicine or the history in the book. And if you want to learn a little bit more, I have some more details on my blog in the science breakdown for The Pull of the Stars. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.